Okay, in part 2, we're going to pick up with the demographic transition model. Now keep in mind that this is just a model. It doesn't 100% predict the future, but it does provide us a pretty good framework to understand the different paths that countries have gone through. When we look at countries that are in stage 4 today, we're really looking at our countries that industrialized the earliest. So Western Europe, North America, those countries have moved through this cycle. Another important factor is not, in addition to economic development, is gender equality. So as we go through these different stages of the model, we're going to see how gender equality plays out. Now, first off, we're going to look at stage 1. Stage 1 of the model is a time when there are very high birth rates and high death rates. Now, stage 1 reflects a time that occurred pre-1750. So today, there are no countries currently in stage 1. In stage 2, we look at a scenario where there's a high natural rate of increase. So the birth rate is significantly higher than the death rate. In stage 2, we find countries that are based in agriculture and perhaps early industry. The high crude birth rate reflects tradition. There's a need for large families to support an agriculturally based economy. We're also looking at, in the early part of stage 2, a high death rate. So within stage 2, there's a few social factors in play. One, we see that the norm, the tradition of a large family, stays true even while the death rate falls. So improvements in sanitation, food supply, basic medicine allows for a population explosion during this stage. So in stage 2, we have our population explosion. This point here where the birth rate is significantly larger than the death rate. And you'll see up top a country that falls into this classification would be Mali, a sub-Saharan African country that has a young population, a high total fertility rate, and a rapidly declining death rate. As we move on into stage 3 of the demographic transition model, we run into Mexico. Another country in here is India. And you'll notice our total population trends upwards through our population explosion in the second half of stage 2 and through stage 3. This total population continues to grow as our CBR, our crude birth rate, begins to fall, and our crude death rate drops drastically. So in stage 3, we see industrialization. We see in an industrial society the need for kids, the need for a large number of kids begins to decline. We see that with improved medicine, improved child care, the infant mortality rate drops, so you don't have to have as many kids to support a family. We see that population growth begins to slow. And a big contributing factor to that is the increased access to contraception, the increased inclusion of women in the workplace, and the increased educational opportunities. So in stage 3, this birth rate drops because the family situation changes, and also women are gaining more equality, are moving more in a more progressive nature. Access to contraception, inclusion in the workforce, educational opportunities, all of these delay and or limit the number of children that a woman will have during her reproductive years. And then towards the end of stage 3, we have what's called the demographic dividend. As our population explosion that occurs around here begins to mature and enters the workforce, our countries have a large tax base. They generate a lot of revenue. The economies tend to boom as long as they are relatively free. And as a result, social services are paid for, child care, education are an increasing part of government expenditures. So this demographic dividend means that we're not paying for a large elderly cohort, we're supporting our working group and we're supporting our younger cohort. And then in stage 4, where we see China starting to move into the middle, the US a little farther along, and then Japan and Portugal towards the end, we see the CBR, the crude birth rate, continue to drop rapidly, where our crude death rate pretty much levels off. So the medicinal advancements introduced in stages 2 and 3, the increased opportunity for women, drives down the birth rate, increased medicine, the increased cost of living and cost of having kids grows here. So in stage 4, children are seen much more as a financial liability than in stage 2 when they are considered more of an economic asset. So as we move through this demographic transition model, kids become more costly, which will, in basic rational economic thought, will lead people to have fewer kids. And we also see the increased opportunities for women, more inclusion in the workplace, more educational opportunities, means postpone having kids. And then when you do have kids, that economic liability is relatively high in these societies. So stage 4, we see a very small population growth. We see our TFR, our total fertility rate, come in line with the replacement level, and in some cases it drops below the replacement level. At the end of stage 4, our society encounters what's called graying of population. We have a high dependency ratio. As members of our older age cohorts in Japan and Portugal and the United States move into retirement, we see an increasing financial burden on our countries to pay for those social services. What a lot of demographers and population geographers are questioning now is the presence of a stage 5, where our crude death rate begins to creep up because our population is relatively old and our crude birth rate continues to decline, building on the factors presented in stages 3 and 4. Increased cost of raising kids, increased workplace inclusion, increased educational opportunities, increasing gender equality. So in stage 5, we would have a negative rate of natural increase, which means that deaths are greater than births and our population contracts. Now, the reason that this is a question is because we don't have really a full generation or 2 generations of data to support stage 5. A lot of demographers and population geographers are including it in updated demographic transition models, but Greiner sticks with the traditional stage 4-stage model, which in the next few years, this decade, will most certainly evolve into a 5-stage model. When we look at our dependency ratio up close, what we're looking at are the number of dependents, which are people over age 65 and under age 15. Dependents are those that don't work generally. They don't contribute economically to society. And what we're looking at is comparing the number of dependents to the overall working age population. So you'll notice here in Uganda that the working population is about 50% of the total population, meaning between the ages of 15 and 65. In Guatemala, we have 55%. In India, we have 64% of the population is working age. India, in stage 3, would fall into that demographic dividend, where the majority, in this case the vast majority of the population is of working age, so they are contributing to society. They are paying into the social benefits like education, retirement, retiree benefits. You'll notice that the median age is very low, so the younger population is going to move into that workforce in coming years and continue to contribute. Japan, on the other hand, has a working population percentage below 50%, a median age of 61, and only 13% of the population is under 15. This means that social expenditures are going to become increasingly weighted for retirees. Without fewer young people moving into the system, contributions are going to be dwindling over time. So you're going to have very large social expenditures for your retirees without a lot of younger people moving into the system, into the economic system, being able to generate revenue. A big concern for Japan is that they're very strict on immigration. So it's very difficult as a foreign-born person to move into Japan and work there. One of the biggest things that facilitates the American population is that our immigrants are relatively young. They come here for economic reasons, so they're able to contribute to the system. Whereas in Japan, we don't have many young people, immigrants aren't coming in, and the median age is over 60. So Japan faces a relatively uncertain future with how they are going to pay to support their elderly class. Again, the demographic dividend, on the other hand, comes into play with that increased productivity. So we saw India on the previous image, where 64% of India's population is working class. In order to experience this dividend, we need a high level of female participation in a lower fertility rate. So more women are going into the workforce. So it's not just that we have 60% of our population is in working class. Here, we also need gender inclusion. So we can't just have men working to experience this dividend. We need to include our entire population. India has a low elderly population, so its expenditures for retirees are relatively low. So it's able to invest in society, invest in education, while have plenty of money left over for retirees. The demographic dividend is short term. So remember, countries move from stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4. So as India continues to prosper economically and include more women into the workforce, the base of the population, the youngest part of the group, is going to shrink relative to the entire population, and it's going to grow older. So this is a time where if a country can adopt open economic policies, support its economy, you could really see an economic boom. We saw Brazil go through this about a decade ago. We saw the United States go through this in the mid-1900s. In the post-World War II era, a few Western European countries, the United States, experienced this dividend. The United States Social Security program was put together during this dividend. And you'll see in this chart, in 1945, we had 42 people paying into Social Security for every one recipient. Today, in 2020, as our population has aged, more people have moved into retirement, our baby boomer population, our younger cohorts, our younger group of population isn't quite as big. We only have 2.5 people paying into Social Security for every recipient. And you could see that that's going to go down in the next few decades. What this tells us is that Social Security is really a demographic issue. It's not so much an issue of how can we set aside enough money. The fact is people are living longer, and our oldest group is growing relative to the entire population. So our baby boomers are all moving into retirement, and we don't have enough people paying in. So it's not a political issue, it's a demographic issue. So the demographic dividend that we hit in the mid-century went away as our population aged, and our total fertility rate dropped, and our family sizes got smaller. So today, we're facing this demographic issue. This map shows us double dependency countries and countries with high dependency ratios. You'll see that the United States falls into that double dependency, where we have a number of young kids and we also have a growing old age population. Other countries like Canada, Russia, China have high old age dependencies, where places, many countries throughout Africa, have a high child dependency ratio, but if they open their economy, if they continue to grow, they're going to hit that demographic dividend this century. They're going to experience that economic boom. And what happens at the end of stage 4 is the potential for what's called a demographic collapse. This is when our population ages in place, it becomes older, it has a low fertility rate, and that higher elderly population, it becomes increasingly difficult to support it. So in countries like Portugal and countries like Japan, we're seeing that they're disproportionately shifting into ages 60 and up. So we don't have as many people paying into the system like we did in the US in the mid-1900s. we don't have as many children being born. In places like Japan, many women have to decide, do I pursue a career or do I have children? Because there's a stigma of working women having children. So